I wonder how I should tell him. I didn't want to burden my son Tim, who is still a college student, but having been given only a year to live by the doctor, I felt I had no choice but to tell him the truth. Tim, I have something important to talk to you about.
What? What's going on?
Well, Mom had some issues during the last checkup, and I went to the hospital today. Then, I revealed to him that my body was riddled with cancer and that if nothing was done, I only had a year left to live. As if to shake off the heaviness that started to fill the air, I quickly put on a smile and said, Tim, you don't have to worry about anything. I'll continue working as I have been, and though I'll have to go to the hospital more, I don't plan on getting in your way.
That's ridiculous.
Tim, who had been silent until then, suddenly shouted in anger.
This is really annoying. So, cancer means I'll eventually have to take care of everything around here, right?
Never having talked back before, Tim's unexpectedly harsh reaction left me at a loss for words.
I can't deal with caregiving or any of that. I'm out of here.
Please, just hear me out. When I returned home from work the next day, all of Tim's things were gone. On the table, there was a note left behind, simply stating that he was going to live for himself from now on. Tim's patience had finally exploded. Since losing my husband Georgie to illness, Tim had been considerate of me, always putting his own needs last. He probably wanted to enjoy his youth just like his friends, but I might have been the one getting in the way of that. As I scrolled through the contacts on my mobile phone, looking for Tim's number.
No. Am I about to make the same mistake again?
I sternly scolded myself for the weakness of wanting to call my son. My name is Roseanne, in my 40s. In my student days, I dated Georgie, a childhood friend 3 years older than me, and we got married right after graduation. Georgie worked in a small printing factory, earning enough for us to live on. Soon after our first son, Tim, was born, we realized it wouldn't be enough, so I decided to start working part-time to help with the finances. In addition to the recession, the demand for printed materials had declined, and the factory's performance wasn't looking good. However, Georgie worked tirelessly from morning till evening without a single complaint, all to protect Tim and me. Sometimes he would come home late at night, venting about the impossible demands pushed onto him by clients, but every time he saw Tim's innocent sleeping face, he'd say to himself,
I can't afford to lose just yet. I'll do my best tomorrow too.
And would put on a smile. As Tim entered elementary school, Georgie began to sigh more often and eventually started leaving food on his plate. Georgie, who had played rugby in his student days and was solidly built, used to eat more than anyone. But one day, a friend who hadn't visited in a while saw him and exclaimed in surprise.
Huh? Have you lost weight?
Georgie's frame had visibly shrunk, and his expression became terribly haggard. The image of the rugby player was completely gone, and both I and Georgie's friends who knew him began to worry about his health. Thanks for the meal. I'm good for today. You hardly ate half of your meal. Maybe you should see a doctor? I have sales first thing in the morning. Recently, another client went out of business. But I'll try my best not to let you and the kids suffer. Georgie answered with a weak smile. Don't overdo it, okay? I'll pick up more part-time work. You shouldn't overdo it either, right? With all the housework and childcare, it's tough. Why don't you and Tim go out and have fun once in a while? Georgie, even in his own difficult times, always thought of Tim and me first. He was a kind man. But when Tim was in middle school, I received a call from Georgie's workplace saying he had collapsed. Tim and I rushed to the hospital he was transported to. It's chronic myelogenous leukemia. It seems he's been overexerting himself. The doctor's words made me bite my lip in frustration. I should have realized sooner that he was feeling unwell. I regretted not insisting more strongly that he get checked out. The doctor, looking very reluctant to deliver more bad news, said with a heavy heart,
"If we had found it a bit earlier, there would have been treatment options. But at this stage, the situation is quite dire. At most, 3 months. That soon? But he's still in his prime ! And our son is just in middle school. We need him to be healthy and with us for much longer. This is a problem."
I became emotional and clung to the doctor.
"Stop it."
Tim stopped me. Indeed, Tim was right. Lashing out at the doctor wouldn't solve anything. In such a moment, I was surprised to see how much my son had grown, capable of handling the situation more calmly than even I, his parent, could. When we entered Georgie's hospital room, he weakly raised his emaciated hand. "You came. I'm sorry."
"What are you talking about?" "Of course, we came. We're family, aren't we?"
"Really sorry, Tim. You had school today, right? Making you leave early for this." "Don't be silly. Dad should be worried about his own health more than anything," Tim said with a weak laugh, grabbing Georgie's frail hand. Since that day, I began to visit Georgie every morning to take care of him before heading to my part-time job at the supermarket and then back to the hospital after work. Tim, not wanting to burden me alone, started to actively cook and do laundry after school. "Tim, don't you have club activities?" I quit. The big tournament just ended anyway. I was proud of my son for turning out to be such a good kid. 6 months after the doctor gave Georgie a 3-month prognosis, Georgie passed away quietly, his treatment efforts in vain. He was our hero. I believe he lived his best for us. I tried to send Georgie off with a smile as much as possible, but I couldn't stop the tears from overflowing. "Don't push yourself, Mom," Tim said, gently stroking my shoulder as I broke down crying. After my husband's funeral, I stopped crying. "From now on, I'll work hard enough for Dad too, and take care of you. You don't worry about anything, just focus on your studies."
"I've been thinking, after I graduate middle school, I'll get a job. I want to help out Mom."
I chuckled bitterly at my son's consideration.
"Actually, I've saved up a lot for your education, thinking about your future. Even when Dad was hospitalized, he scolded me to never touch that money." "Really? Can I really go on to higher education? Don't talk like you're all grown up when you're still a kid. How long do you think I've been your mom? That's why I started working part-time."
Right. Thank you. Truth be told, life was never easy, but Tim showed understanding, mindful of my feelings. I got hired as a full-time employee. The manager at the supermarket where I worked spoke to the headquarters on behalf of our family. We sold our previous home and we moved into a small apartment. Tim, now in high school, declined his friends' invitations to join clubs, choosing instead to come straight home to prepare dinner in my late absence. "I'm sorry, Tim. You probably want to do club activities, right? You don't have to be so considerate."
"I just want to learn cooking, that's all,"
Tim would always say with a smile, but every time I saw that smile, I felt guilty for imposing such a burden on him. "Mom's all I have for family. Don't push yourself too hard." Tim always put me before himself. Though we couldn't afford luxuries, we were happily living together, just the two of us. "Have you decided where you want to go to college?" "I'm not going to college. I've decided to work after graduation." I've been talking to the career counselor about it, Tim said with a forced smile, but one day, he was captivated by a TV commercial for a university open campus. Hey, Tim. Like I said before, I've prepared enough for your education, not just for high school, but for college too. You can go. Tim smiled, avoiding eye contact. You're really struggling, aren't you? I'm not a kid anymore. I understand that much. I tried to argue. There's no such thing. But before I could. I get it. I'll try going to college, but I'll do it without causing you any trouble. I don't know how far I can go, but I'll give it my all, Tim said with an unusually serious look. From that day on, Tim immersed himself in intense studying. When I got home, dinner was already prepared, and Tim was studying in the corner of the room using a cardboard box as a desk.
Welcome back. I'll warm up the soup,
he said, starting to get up, but I stopped him. No, stay there. I can do it myself. You continue studying. Mom, you must be tired from work, right? Then take a rest. I was just about to take a break anyway. After a period of hard work, Tim was successfully admitted to his desired national university.
Congratulations! Getting into a national university is really something, Tim.
This university offers tuition exemption. I thought it might lessen the burden on you, Mom. The commute from home to the university was long, but even so, Tim said. Living alone or using student housing, it's a waste of money. And started commuting by bicycle early in the morning. What was already a considerable effort, unbeknownst to me, Tim had also started working part-time. I didn't realize this fact until much later.
Don't overdo it. It's okay. I just want to do what I want to do,
he said with sparkling eyes, leaving me without a reply. Surely, Tim had dreams and goals. But due to our financial situation, he kept them to himself until now. If Tim has something he wants to do, I have no right to stop him. Without saying more, I decided to just watch over Tim. Around his third year, Tim's complexion worsened. He began sighing deeply when waking up in the morning, and upon returning home, he'd say, "I don't need dinner," and immediately lay down. He seemed to continue his part-time job, but I grew increasingly worried. Have you been feeling tired lately? Your complexion is really bad. Can't you take a break from your part-time job?
It's okay. It's tough because of the staff shortage recently, but it's nothing for Mom to worry about.
Tim would always respond that way every time I brought it up. Then, one day, a letter arrived for me. It was the result notification of the annual cancer screening for local residents. Seeing the further examination required note on one of the tests, I was struck with fear. It's going to be okay, right? Surely, the re-examination will just be a mistake, right? A colleague from my part-time job once had a scare with a breast cancer screening. After further tests at a specialist hospital, no cancer cells were found, and it turned out to be a false alarm. Surely, my case would end up being a similar story, just something to laugh about. While trying to mask my fear, I decided to undergo a detailed examination at a specialist hospital. That's when I was plunged into despair. There's no mistake. It's breast cancer, the doctor said with a clear tone. Fortunately, it was discovered early, so if we proceed with the appropriate treatment now. My thoughts immediately turned not to my own body, but to my work, and above all, to Tim. I can't quit my current life until Tim graduates from college and secures a job. Is there no way to postpone the treatment? I can't quit my job now. I have my own life to live.
However, if we don't treat it now, the cancer cells could eventually metastasize to the lungs or bones, and it might be too late. In the worst case, you could have only 1 year left to live. 1 year to live. The cruelty of those words made my heart and body tremble. Although the doctor looked serious, it didn't seem like he was trying to scare me. Let me think about it for today. First, I'll discuss with my family what we should do going forward. The doctor sighed deeply, looking grave. Understood. But please, make your decision as soon as possible. As a doctor, I don't want to lose a life that could be saved. I hope you understand. With that, the doctor spoke earnestly, and I bowed my head, leaving the hospital for the time being. Returning home, I felt like I was about to be crushed by my own emotions. How should I tell him? Lately, Tim seemed quite exhausted, struggling even to walk. I didn't want to burden him any further. But it seemed I had no choice but to tell him the truth. Tim came home looking extremely tired that day, too. He just laid down on the futon he spread out, suppressing my desire to let him rest. Tim, there's something important I need to talk to you about. I mustered up the courage to say. Sensing the unusual atmosphere, Tim immediately sat up. What's up? What happened? Well, Mom got caught up in the cancer screening recently. I went to the hospital today, and then I revealed to him that my body had been invaded by breast cancer and that I had been given a year to live. Trying to shake off the heaviness that was starting to settle in, I quickly put on a bright smile and said, but, Tim, you don't have to worry about anything. I'll continue working as before, and though I'll have to go to the hospital more, I don't plan on getting in your way. You can rest assured and keep on as you have been. That's ridiculous! Tim, who had been silently listening until then, suddenly shouted in anger. Cancer? Hospital visits? Really annoying. Eventually, I'll have to take care of you, just like with Dad, right? This is really annoying. Tim. Never having shown such a defiant attitude before, Tim's unexpectedly harsh reaction left me at a loss for words. Soon, you might find it difficult to even move around by yourself, right? Then, I'm the one who will have to take care of you, right? That's ridiculous. I can't deal with caregiving. I'm out of here. I don't intend to burden you, Tim. Please, just hear me out. Tim cut off the conversation unilaterally and lay back down, pulling the futon over his head and refusing to show his face no matter what I said. I couldn't tell if he had fallen asleep or was just pretending, but I realized that saying anything more would be futile. I'm home. Tim, are you here? The next day, after finishing work and returning home, the room felt noticeably larger than usual. All of Tim's belongings were gone. On the table, there was a letter left behind, simply stating that he was going to live for himself from now on. Now on I will live for myself. I repeated the words written there over and over out loud. Tim's patience had finally burst. For years, he had been considerate towards me, putting his own needs last. He probably wanted to enjoy his youth just like his friends. But I, as his mom, failed to see the burden he was carrying. No, perhaps I did see it, but chose to rely on his kindness. I had no right to depend on him any further. Staring at my reflection in the mirror, I bitterly admonished myself. I'm a failure as a mom. Suppressing my sorrow, I berated myself. As if it were a form of atonement for my son. With Tim gone, I was left to fight my illness alone. Of course, there wasn't a day I didn't think of Tim. Yet,
I consoled myself that he had finally become free from such a worthless mom. He must have found his own path. As I scrolled through the contacts on my mobile phone, looking for Tim's number.
No, no. Am I about to make the same mistake again?
I fiercely scolded myself for the impulse to call my son. I decided to quit my job to focus on treatment. I had intended to continue working and undergoing treatment while Tim was in college, but Tim was no longer here. He had found what he wanted to do. Strangely, this thought made me want to live a bit more of my own life. I wanted to see with my own eyes the kind of life Tim would lead from here on. Quitting my job and using the little savings I had, along with insurance and government programs, I underwent surgery to remove the cancer cells and received radiation therapy. Despite sometimes feeling overwhelmed by this endless battle, the support of doctors, nurses, fellow patients, and my former colleagues kept me looking forward and facing my illness.
Good morning. You seem to be in good spirits today,
the nurse said, smiling at the empty plate from my meal.
Thanks to you, I've gotten used to the taste of hospital food. Plus, I get hungry so quickly now. That's a sign you're recovering well.
Such exchanges with the nurse, who had become a good friend, became my new daily routine. 3 years had passed since the 1-year prognosis.
No recurrence this time. That's great news.
Every time I heard those words from my doctor, I felt like dancing.
Any changes at home? Please contact us immediately if anything comes up.
I had already been discharged from the hospital, but I needed to attend monthly follow-up appointments. The view of the town from the bus window. The conversations and laughter of people. And greetings with acquaintances. Touching these mundane aspects of daily life made even the inconvenience of hospital visits feel like a joy to me. Where could he be now, and what kind of life is he leading? He was always good at his studies and could do anything by himself, a very responsible child from the start. Perhaps by now, he has graduated from college and is entrusted with important tasks at a large company. Has he found someone? Or maybe he's married and even has children. Though he left home 3 years ago and never returned, I still hoped for Tim's happiness. One day, after a routine checkup, I returned home to find a young woman I didn't recognize standing in front of my room. Upon seeing me, she hurriedly adjusted her hair and bowed.
Excuse me, are you Tim's mom?
Hearing that unexpected name from her mouth made me feel as if time had stopped.
I apologize for the late introduction. I've been dating Tim since college. My name is Emily. Is that so?
Knowing she was my son's partner, I was at a loss for how to react.
Please come in. Though, it's so small you might be surprised.
I decided to let Emily into my home. I wanted to ask her many things about Tim. Is he doing well? What's he up to now? My first question naturally was about Tim's current situation. However, Emily didn't immediately answer that question.
Tim told me that you had cancer. How have you been since then? As you can see, I'm fine now. Of course, I still need to go to the doctor. That's good to hear.
Seeing her genuinely relieved made me confident that Tim had found a good person.
So, is Tim doing well?
I repeated the same question. Emily hesitated for a while before finally speaking. Tim is currently hospitalized.
Hospitalized? Is something wrong with him?
I was shocked and pressed Emily for details. It happened 3 years ago. After finishing his part-time job, he suddenly felt unwell. When we went to the hospital for tests, he was diagnosed with chronic myelogenous leukemia. Chronic myelogenous leukemia. Hearing that dreaded disease name made me feel as if my heart was being crushed. I couldn't believe that Tim, too, had been afflicted with the same disease as Georgie. Tim has been struggling. Whether to tell you about it, worried it would cause unnecessary concern.
Unnecessary worry? What do you mean by that? He's my only family. Such an important thing should definitely be shared with me, his mom.
Yes, that's why he and I talked about it, and we were just about to tell you, Roseanne, when you fell ill.
What?
The memory of Tim rebelling against me that day 3 years ago vividly came back to me. I'm sorry. I didn't mean to blame you, Roseanne. I just wanted to tell you the facts. It's okay, Emily. You don't need to apologize. That day, Tim indeed looked pale. He didn't say anything, but perhaps he was about to. Maybe he was about to tell me, but hesitated until the last moment not to worry me. At that moment, I confessed to having only a year left to live. That's when Tim must have decided not to tell me the truth. Tim said if he told you about his illness, you would surely prioritize his well-being over your own. Tim just wanted you to live as long as possible. He wished more than anything that you would focus on your treatment without worrying about him. So that's why Tim said those harsh words that day. He might have been crying at the bedroom, trying not to show his tears, pretending to sleep desperately. The message Tim left behind, saying he would live for himself, now seemed to have a completely different meaning to me. I had always believed that message meant Tim wanted to live his life away from me, but that wasn't it. The real meaning was his kind wish for me to live for myself. Frustration for not understanding my son's true intentions and anger at myself for being such an inadequate mom filled my heart. I might have shown my emotions without realizing it.
Perhaps that's why Tim couldn't tell you the truth, thinking you would blame yourself.
I took a deep breath to calm my turbulent emotions. I'm sorry for not offering you coffee. I wiped away my tears, stood up, and tried to compose myself.
After he left home, Tim lived with me in my apartment for 3 years. Is that so? How is he doing now? Is he recovering?
As I served the coffee, Emily hesitantly said, Tim refused to be hospitalized immediately.
Why?
For the past 3 years, Tim has been juggling part-time jobs and outpatient visits. He used the money for my living expenses, your treatment fee, and a little for his own treatment. Saying this, Emily handed me an envelope.
This is from Tim. He wanted it to be used for your treatment.
For me. Tim hadn't changed at all. He was still the kind son he always was. But his body couldn't take it anymore. It happened last month. Tim collapsed and had to be hospitalized.
Such a foolish child. A truly foolish child.
As I cried out, Emily came around behind me and gently stroked my back without saying a word.
Emily, tell me. Which hospital is he in now?
Well, knowing him, he probably made you promise not to tell me, but please, I want to know. I'm well now, and I want to be there for him. Emily exhaled and then, as if making up her mind, said,
All right. I was planning to visit Tim now, so please come with me.
Led by Emily, I went to the hospital where Tim was admitted. Seeing my son for the first time in 3 years, now greatly thinned, my tears wouldn't stop. Tim, I'm sorry I didn't realize you had become like this. Tim glared at Emily, who was next to me, with a fearful look.
Why did you tell her?
He began to blame her, but quickly noticed the sadness in Emily's eyes and said, Sorry, it's not your fault. The bad one is me, for putting you through this. And Mom, sorry for keeping my illness a secret. I really wanted to see you too, but I couldn't bring myself to say it.
You were always trying not to worry me, weren't you? You've always been so kind. But don't worry. I'm okay now. There's no sign of cancer recurrence so far. Really. Hearing that eases my mind too,
Tim said, showing me a smile for the first time in 3 years. Soon, the doctor came. May I have a moment? He said.
Tim has been refusing hospitalization for the past 3 years because he couldn't afford the treatment, continuing to work part-time. But he reached his limit, and I had to hospitalize him on my own decision. Thank you.
However, even now, he's only concerned about the costs, wanting only the minimal treatment. Since it's the patient's wish, there's not much more I can do.
Tim's dad also had chronic myelogenous leukemia. If he had received treatment earlier, he might have been saved. But my husband prioritized his family over himself. I can't lose my son too. I'll manage the treatment costs somehow. Please, save him.
I had an idea about Tim's treatment costs. I had intended to use Georgie's insurance for Tim's college fees, but since Tim got a scholarship, I decided to allocate it to his treatment costs.
Understood. We'll do our best.
The doctor's firm words made my heart tremble. Georgie, please help him. I called out in my heart to my late husband, who I believed was watching over us from heaven. Tim became more positive about his treatment, and intensive medication therapy began. Roseanne, please rest. You haven't slept at all, have you?
Thank you. I'll leave the rest to you.
Emily and I took turns taking care of him. One day, Emily handed me an envelope.
This is the living expenses Tim had saved for you, Roseanne.
Holding the envelope and feeling my son's kindness, I was also frustrated by his serious and stubborn nature.
Use this for yourself.
When I refused to accept it, Emily looked a bit perplexed but soon replied.
Understood.
With the treatment costs no longer a concern, Tim made a smooth recovery and subsequent follow-up observations were favorable. Months later, he was successfully discharged from the hospital.
I'm going to start my life over again. I have to make up for the time I lost. You'll be fine.
True to my words, Tim returned to university and, with financial support from Emily, who had already joined the workforce, he was able to graduate smoothly. Having secured a job, Tim thanked Emily and me. It's finally starting, huh? He seemed hopeful about the bright future ahead. Tim's earnest personality and consideration for others were highly regarded at his workplace, leading to a promotion to a managerial position within just a few years. Feeling that his life had stabilized, Tim proposed to Emily, and she accepted.
Use this for the wedding expenses,
I said, handing them an envelope.
This was given to me by Tim for my treatment costs, but I never ended up using it. So, use it for yourselves instead. Thank you, Roseanne.
Several more years passed. Both Tim and I continue to attend our regular checkups, and fortunately, neither of us has had a recurrence and we are living healthily. Tim was promoted to department head and managed to build a duplex home.
Our dream has come true,
Emily said, sharing the joy with Tim.
Yeah, I've always wanted to provide a home for Mom like this since middle school,
Tim said, gently stroking Emily's now visibly larger belly. For this child too, we need to become even happier.
Yes, we do.
Before I knew it, large tears were rolling down my cheeks. Perhaps it's because of my age, but I seem to have become more tearful lately. I never imagined that Tim's dream since middle school was to live in a big house with me.
Let's start preparing dinner.
Trying not to show my tears, I raised my voice louder than usual.
Roseanne, let me help you.
Emily hurried after me. I continue to watch over my son and his growing family with a tender smile, always from the sidelines.